sometimes it helps to have those little bumps and those little details. So,
Mm-hmm.
Maruka, hello.
Hello.
How you
I'm
doing?
sorry, I'm fine, but I have been like so busy that it hasn't been real for like the last month. So sorry, I've been a no-show lately.
No worries. There's no expectations of this group. I'm, as usual, I'm just thankful for whoever shows up. All right. I will kick things off on the repo here. I did shoot out an agenda last night. I'm going to be a little, my employer focused today because I'm a little biased this week because we've had a release. But I did, let's just do the basic formalities for people watching the video. API spec toolbox. We do this every Friday. The goal is to just kind of, talk about the different API specifications and explore ways in which we can drum up more attention, awareness, and participation amongst folks when it comes to all of the API specs, including OpenAPI, async JSON schema, and whatnot. So we do it all here on GitHub. We manage all the ideas using GitHub issues, and we kind of slice and dice and organize things. And then we just kind of talk and see what we can move forward each week. And with that said, kind of want to open up the floor. Are you guys working on anything cool? Anything new and interesting that you'd like to talk about? No. Because I got lots of cool, new, interesting things. So, but... All right. Well, you guys got to stop me if you got something you want to share. I'm gonna dive in. So to keep trying to move forward, one trick with the Open API projects that or the API spec toolbox projects is, trying to weave it into my work, so I can get paid to do this stuff. That's what I'm constantly trying to do. So, some of this is going to be Postman related just because I'm trying to get Postman to pay the bill to make some of this happen. And then where we can find other funding and other investment and time and energy, that's really, my main interest. So this week, kind of I alluded to some of these projects in weeks before, some of these open source and standards projects. But I now have a new forum where I'm able to move some of these projects forward. And it has to do with the latest Postman release, which is only available on the web. It's not available in the desktop, which is it has a new UI and it has a new feature called public workspaces. And if you'll look, this is definitely reminiscent of another platform that we use to manage ourselves here. So if you look at GitHub, there's definitely some similarities between what's going on with Postman right now, in kind of response to, I think, the same asks from our customers that kind of resemble, the same asks, I think, that were made of GitHub around 2010, I would say. So for me, GitHub started around 2010, kind of changing how I do what I do, not just managing open source code, but how I manage content. And that's where I learned to run projects like this. That's why API Spec Toolbox is here, is because every idea in my world starts with a GitHub repo. And why it kicked off in 2014 is because in 2013 I worked in U.S. government, and one of my fellow workers was from GitHub and went back to GitHub, and he was showing me how to use GitHub in some kind of new and exciting ways to manage not just code but content and data, CSVs and JSON files. And so I switched to have my entire world kind of run on GitHub in 2014. Because while I was at government, in the federal government, I couldn't stand up a server. I couldn't stand up a simple web hosting page. I couldn't do anything. And GitHub plus GitHub Pages allowed me to do a lot of that. And so you'll see like a lot of the federal government usage of GitHub these days is from this group of us that were really pushing government agencies to do it, because we got approval the authority to operate on GitHub. And then that just kind of opened the floodgates for how we could use it to manage all the open data work we were doing, all the open API work we were doing. So you see that 5-6 years later still happening. I'm still very GitHub centric in what I do. But for me, the next thing, the next kind of shift is around Postman public workspaces in kind of a similar way. And so this is, I showed you guys a couple of these in the previous weeks. This is a PSD2 UK public banking public workspace. And so this is available to anyone. The URL, anyone can come in here. I happen to be logged in and be the person who created the team or the workspace. But this is meant to show, demonstrate how you can define for an industry, use OpenAPI to define a set of core resources in this case.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah.
Just curious, are we supposed to be seeing something on your screen?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I did this, did the reverse of this earlier. I shared too much when I wasn't supposed to be sharing. And so now I'm doing the reverse of it. Thank you, Neil. I appreciate it. So here's where I was at is as I was talking about GitHub, and here's where I was at when I was talking about the Open API in comparison to it, just to set the stage. So people on the video will actually see what I was talking about, but I apologize to everyone on the call for not hitting the share button. So thank you. And always interrupt me, you guys, because you know me, I'll just keep rambling. So as I was saying is the purpose of, there's many different purposes of a public workspace, and that's one of the things I'm working through right now, and I'm hoping our community will come up with some really interesting uses. But for me, it centers around the Open API specification. And really, this workspace is a UK public banking workspace. And I have 6 open APIs in here. These are from Open Banking UK. And these are the 6 open APIs that the UK government mandates that all banks in the UK should have. And this workspace is meant to demonstrate the importance of these open API contracts and then help people see how they actually work and function in a public kind of performance and public dance. And so I have these 6 open API specifications here that anyone can watch. So back to that GitHub-like functionality, you know, we've got some of the similar buttons as you would see in a GitHub repo. You can leave comments on an individual API, open API. You can actually highlight and comment on specific parts and start threads basically on a specific part of the open API and have conversations about that. You can mention people. This is my API evangelist, so it's just got my wife in it. But and then you can share and you can work with this open API in various ways. One of the first things, let me pop in and see. Someone joined us? No. So one of the things that you can do with these open APIs is you can generate Postman collections for different purposes. And this is very much after Postman joined the OAI, or as, you know, I would say this is the catalyst for why we joined the Open API, is because the Open API is very much the truth in Postman. And Postman Collections, which is an open source API specification, can be used to drive different stops along the API lifecycle. And you can use it to document your API, and you can use it to mock your API. So what I've set up here is a set of collections, one for each open API, that allows you to actually make calls to that API and then actually test each API and certify each API. So I'm still doing the work to set up each test script, but the goal is there would be a generic API open API contract for each of these government mandated APIs. Here's a collection for you to make calls to that API. You can see documentation for that API. Here's the docs for the API. I can click into a full view documentation for that API. And I can actually make calls to it, but I can actually certify that this is compliant using Postman tests to actually say this API matches this open API contract, so you can do contract testing. But this is generic. This is a standard set of open API contracts, a standard set of collections, where I can then apply this to each bank is using an environment, which is also another open source specification for describing where the API exists, a specific instance of that API. And so here I have 15, 20 banks. These are the banks that the UK government is mandating to have these APIs. Not all of them have each of those APIs, because there's a couple that don't have like commercial loans. And so, Bank of Ireland, here's the URL for Bank of Ireland. And if I choose that environment from here, say Bank of Ireland, go back to my ATM locator request here, hit send. Oh, I don't have my desktop agent running because I am in the web edition of Postman. You got to have a local agent running. Let me, looks like I'm going now. Let's try that again. No, come on, baby. Here's the desktop agent. And I should see a list of Bank of Ireland ATM locations. And so now I can switch and say I want to do HSBC, hit send, and I can see a list of HSBC banking locations across the country. So the goal of this public workspace is to really demonstrate the importance of an open API contract at the industry level, how that contract can be applied for documenting and testing and certifying the contract of these APIs, that it matches that open API, and then show this actually working. So people can come here and kick the tires, people can actually reverse engineer and see it working. And so that's one purpose of a public workspace. And I've walked through this before in previous gatherings here. I wanted to show it again in the context of a public workspace, because now anyone can come and view this and actually put it to use. I will pause there before I dive into any other usage of Open API. Any thoughts?
Ken, I got a question here. So typically with APIs, the client application has to register to get, an API key or client credentials. So how do you manage that sort of thing in this environment? So
this set of APIs do not require auth. These are public APIs. So there is no auth layer here. There is a set of open APIs for the account services and for each of these banks that I'm putting into a separate workspace, and those will actually require authorization. Now what in this public workspace scenario, keys, tokens, auth values can be stored in the environments. And what happens here is, say we need a bearer token, and this value right here, this initial value, this is what is shared across all user groups. This is what's the current value is only for me in my account. So anything right here is just for me. And when I'm using it, it'll never be synced, it'll never be shared, it'll never be used by anybody else. So you put the information, if it's a token, say you want to actually make it widely available, make it publicly available, you can. But this sync column is generally for if you're doing a private workspace and you want to share tokens across team members. Rarely are you going to share a token publicly But you can have instructions, you can have the key values for it. I would say an example of this you can find with, go to the Explorer. Yeah, I don't care about it. And I'm still working with Twitter to get their public workspace up. But if you come to the Twitter team and you click on the Twitter v2, that it'll work the same as when this is in a public workspace. So let's go ahead and load it in the web. Let's just do it in my personal. So I'm not in a team workspace, but this will work the same as when it's in a public workspace, is as it does when people provide collections in the network. Right now is Twitter gave me a, since it loads here, it should have given me an environment. Yeah, so here's Twitter v2 environment, and they just populate it, give you, the values you're going to need, the keys you're going to need, but not the values, and you've got to plug in your own values. But instructions on how you do this should always be part of the collection. So if you go to Twitter's collection here, they do a pretty good job of documenting that. That walks you through how to actually get your key, how to install it, how to use the environment and plug in the key and token, and they give you everything that you need. So we're working on more seamless additions of that when it comes to public workspaces, making it a little bit less friction and easier for people. But that's kind of a quick look at how it would be handled. So really, my goal is to use this format to move forward a handful of API spec toolbox projects. So the UK banking is a pretty clear industry. So PSD2, geographic standard, UK. I'm doing, and these are again ones that I showed you guys in previous weeks, but I showed you in a private workspace. This is Open 311. Similar, we have one Open API contract that is for submitting non-emergency events in a civic information or municipal environment. And then I have one collection for that. And then I have a whole of like 25 cities that you can actually make calls to. So again, showing the importance of an Open API contract, defining a specific API, but then using it as a standard across multiple cities, all here in a workspace. Again, these are not public or do not require authorization. So each environment just has the base URL and then the response format that's being returned as JSON. No auth needed. So this just continues to show how I'm going to use this to drive forward specific Open API driven standards conversations. I've set up, here's this one I just got started on, and it's pretty robust. But the fast healthcare interoperability resources, which is a single Open API, it's pretty massive. I'm gonna write a script to actually break this up because it's pretty robust. If you look at the collection that's generated from it, you'll see a wealth of resources in here. We should probably break this up and make it more modular, so it's not just one massive collection, that we have a buffet of different Open APIs for each segment, and then they all just kind of reference each other. But this Open API contract for FHIR is pretty fundamental to the healthcare interoperability and integration conversation in the US and North America. And so I'm going to be using this workspace to keep an active living Open API here with a set of collections. And then I'm going to be publishing, right now I just have a mock server, but I'll be publishing different instances. There's a variety of instances out there that are fire compliant that you can use sandboxes, and so I'll be adding those here so that people can actually play with different instances and see it in action. So that's, so we've gone PSD2 UK banking, we've gone to 311 municipal standards. This is healthcare, and showing how the importance of open API. I'm also doing this with Jeff and Open Travel. So I'm going to be setting up a public workspace toolbox for open travel that really shows how you can apply the open travel standard, open API spec, how you can certify it, show it actually working in action. This is, I'm very open API centric in my conversations here, but this truth can still be Swagger. It can still be RAML, and these can be GraphQL endpoints. And then as Postman becomes a multi-protocol platform, we're going to be investing in async being here as well. So async will be here once we light up WebSockets and start making our way into TCP, HTTP 2 and 3. And so we're really invested in this API specs being the source of truth, and then leveraging collections and environments to actually realize that contract throughout the API lifecycle. So public workspaces for all of that. I'm very spec focused. I would say, I'm going to keep moving projects from this working group here into this. I've started taking schema.org. These are individual open APIs for different schema.org objects. So here's a code object, here's an open API definition for it, and then I have a collection for it. I'm going to launch a mock server for each of these and then just show it so people can play with it, and try to encourage people to use schema.org objects more consistently across how they're building their resources, and try to use a public workspace to get people not just using schema.org but using open API and JSON schema to apply those. So another example of a public workspace here, but again supporting the API spec toolbox conversation. What other workspaces? I think, let me see. So I actually started moving and doing our work here for the different projects. So I'm going to be using for building, coming back to our GitHub repo here, some of the projects that we're fleshing out as part of OAI discussions, but just wider, involve creating a people directory, a directory of service providers, and a directory of open source tools. So I have those here. I have basically an API for all of the open source tools. I have the same for service providers. You can click on it here. You can see all the service providers. I'm creating a visualization that will then list it and act as the kind of single page app that I've been having. So you'll actually be able to see a list of all of the service providers right here in Postman in the public workspace. But because this is an API, this data can be used anywhere by anybody. But anybody can come here to the workspace and they can fork one of these collections and launch their own directory. They can use it in their own solution. So I'm going to be using this as an information management for the spec toolbox. I'm going to add a list of questions. I'm going to add a list of conversations. Even the recordings for this open office hours. I will add all of these to an individual API, and then what I'll be doing is then syndicating that, because we're using that API anywhere that I want those to actually list. Now, what I'm playing with is other ways that Frank had mentioned Couple other people had mentioned is how do we use Twitter within things. Whoops, that's not the right. There we are. So I'm going to be using the Twitter API to pull in open API conversations, async API conversations. I'm going to be setting up monitors to regularly pull that data, because this is very much, something that I do just kind of manually. I've showed this before, in Twitter. I have columns where I monitor, come on, it's all frozen here, where I monitor different API conversations, and two of them being Open API and Swagger API. So I will set these up as monitors in the workspace. I'll be pulling people's handles and looking for people who are building interesting things, as well as the tools. Right now I've just been bookmarking and retweeting some of these. But this is all investigation into new people who are doing interesting things with Open API, Swagger, Async API, but also companies and open source tools and service providers. So really starting to automate how we populate the people, the service providers, and the tooling using the Twitter API. And so I'll be building out over the next couple weeks a set of Twitter integrations that run and pull that data and help localize it here, and then ultimately adding it to the list of open source tooling, and then we can further visualize and hydrate them here. And my goal with that is to create just a set of APIs for the API specification industry, or the toolbox, that people can then pull from to build their own directories and contribute to it. People can fork these, people can submit merge requests back. So it works very similar to how it would work on GitHub, how I've been running it on GitHub, but now it's much more API centric, it's much more open API driven, rather than just being on GitHub. So, but each of these data sources, I've talked about this before, the list of tools, hello, why isn't that one working? Why did it stop working? Oh, because I don't have visualization. There's the data. This is just API's JSON. So this, the actual storage of all of this data, of all of these service providers and tools, is just in the API's JSON or APIs.yaml format. So this, these APIs are defined as Open API, but the actual data source or data store behind them is another API specification, API's JSON. So, so again, just using the specs and to further define the API spec space. So I think that's the last, standards-based, industry-based, and then using it itself to help me kind of do some of the work that helped me escalate some of the projects here that I want to drive forward. I would like to add a directory for extensions. I'm adding the list for questions. I'm gonna keep adding taxonomy, and then I'll keep running the newsletter here on GitHub, but be aggregating and building an archive of the newsletter using an actual API. And so just trying to be API first in how I manage the toolbox, how I manage this, amplification of the specs, as well as for the different sectors. So I want to get each of the sectors here with a working public workspace that I can link to, show these in action, show the specs in action, but then actually be moving forward the projects here in an API first kind of way. So yeah, that's pretty much the agenda that I had. I mean, I'm happy to dive into other aspects of how I'm going to be moving forward the industries or the specs, and move it, the conversation outside of just the Postman release this week. But yeah, what else we got? Anything you guys want to dive into or think about? No? Very quiet, not chatty bunch today.
Pretty quiet. This Toolbox stuff looks really, really cool, though. Just being able to play around with these open API definitions in Postman looks really useful, and I wish you guys a lot of luck with it. Hopefully, a lot of people will start adopting this and collaborating on open APIs this way. It's really
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah, we're hoping. I mean, it's definitely a commercial play. I acknowledge that, but I hope I hope it becomes a way of pushing forward standards. I guess there's that one. I don't know if I have it in this workspace actually, but I'm gonna, kind of building on the schema.org work is. Yeah, no, this is a different one. But I've showed it plenty of times before as my API first approach to building a products API. So I'm going to have a bunch of, templates to show people how to build APIs in a workspace. And, me, myself, I'm a reverse engineer. So really seeing an API working and functioning and then reverse engineering that's how I learn, and I'm hoping that translates to other folks, that they're actually able to see something working, get hands-on with it, and understand it. So. One thing I am actually playing with, and this is, see if I can find it. Yeah, it's right here. Nope, that's not it. Here it is. Import this collection. One thing I'm playing with is, and I'm building off of the Open API docs. So this Open API documentation here is using the source from this to provide some of my customers with what I'm calling a README here. But it's a portable collection that lives internally. This is actually for Kroger, but I'll get down to the APIs portion. Has a portion where I'm educating them on what Swagger is and that you shouldn't be using it. I'm gonna amplify this section, but here's version 3, which you should be using, which just links to the OAI docs here, but has inline training, teaches them, and I just pull from the content there, teaches them about each of the Open API objects. And I'm also, the next phase of this is put a video link right here to a quick bit that shows this functioning, shows you actually working with this, so it makes it a little bit more hands-on. And so I'm playing with how I educate people about the Open API specification, because a big part of them using Postman or them being successful with the API lifecycle is them understanding the Open API spec. And so this shows, I would say, the importance of this kind of open source approach to delivering API or Open API content, but then how do we pull that and use that in localized versions that actually show people how it works. And so with a video link next to each one, an actual kind of functioning snippet, and then just kind of walk them through each of the objects and gives them a healthy dose of Open API literacy along the way. But this is localized, embedded in their company's workspace, but they can link out and end up here at each turn and be able to get what they need. And so I'm playing with Open API literacy in different ways, building on the content here that's already been built. And I think that's an important thing that I want to show is, like, how do we not just create our own, especially as commercial service providers, how do we not create our own content? How do we build on what the OAI is already building, but make it available in new and interesting ways that help people? So I'll keep working on that one. But that's, I would say, around the education piece of the toolbox. How do we actually teach people about the specs, as well as teaching them about the overall API lifecycle and everything. So, right. I don't know what else I got. I can dive into
Is
some
the
other
plan
things.
to move over all content from GitHub to this workspace, Ken? Is that the
I wouldn't say
short-term
all.
plan?
I wouldn't say all, but there's aspects. They're still they're intertwined. I would leave it at that. Is each open API that you have defined. Oh, I don't have any in this workspace, but if I go back to UK public banking, each open API can be synced to GitHub, and I don't know where that sync button went. Keep doing demos to show it, and it's not here anymore, and that worries me. But there's a sync button here normally that syncs to GitHub, and so Postman is still very much intertwined with GitHub. I'm still very dependent on my storytelling. I mean, I can't just change my muscle memory overnight. But no, I'll keep this landing page. If a project doesn't have an API behind the project, I will keep it here, and I'll keep it probably in GitHub repo or some other content or some other platform. But if it's got an API behind it, I'm probably going to move it to the API spec toolbox here. But I don't want to, alienate people that don't have a GitHub, because to be able to comment and participate, you'd have to have a GitHub account, but anyone can see it. You don't need to, it's just a web page, so you don't actually need to sign in to get to it. But I don't want to limit people, but honestly, like after 6 years of running my world on GitHub, people are just as intimidated by GitHub, so I'm going to be playing with kind of what that looks like. How do I get more people involved in these conversations that aren't developers? And hopefully I can achieve that. So no, not entirely. I'll still use GitHub, but a lot of, if it's an API centric if it requires an open API at the core, if it requires any sort of integration and auth and pulling of data and using monitors to automate things, then yeah, I'm gonna do it here, because I can pull that data. Because I would say with the toolbox here, still doing all of this data manually here, pulling of these columns and these threads, being able to automate that and have the data right here, and then filter and work with it, and then build out these database or these APIs from that data. That's going to be the benefit of here, and I can do that here on GitHub, but I have to write scripts. The scripts to do it have to live somewhere else, so I have to use the GitHub API to do that. In a public workspace, all the scripts and everything is localized here, so each of these collections, if I need to automate the service provider list, I can write a script here and a script here to do that work, and then anybody can fork that and use that. I can't do that here. I can create actions and start doing some things here, but that is more source code oriented. This is more API and integration oriented. So I've got all my auth for Twitter. I've got all the data store that I need. I've got all the API definitions here. So the API centricity of it is gonna, I think, help me move forward faster on some of the projects. So. Anything else you guys want to hear about today? Well, I was gonna also touch on, Neil jumped off, but I'm working through these projects that we talked through last week, because last week I ran through them with the OAI with Neil and with Ole, and trying to move forward these projects. These are the ones that I put on the website, and Frank and others were referencing. I think it's off the homepage already. Man, I actually wrote some blog posts this week. I'm excited. So these are the projects here, broken down into 3 different buckets. I was working on the 4th and 5th bucket, which are API, the standards. So one was, doing work on healthcare PSD2, basically the public workspaces I just showed you. So that was one additional bucket, and I forget what the fifth one was. But anyways, that's kind of where I'm going to go back to today after this call, is just dive into these projects and keep moving forward the service provider, the open source tools, the people, and the extensions directory. And that's what I'm doing here, is this workspace. And then get the video interviews and get the podcast and start fleshing out what it takes to do these projects, and then get the newsletter going, and then pitch what the white papers might be. These are going to still all use GitHub to kind of do these projects, so they don't really if it's not that API backdrop, I'll still add a GitHub element to manage those projects. So anyways, I'm going to move forward on that and kind of dive into that next week, I think, because this week's been dominated for me by Public Workspaces launch and getting all that out the door. But next week I'll go back to just focusing on getting these projects, because I want to get the OAI moving on some of them. And I also got meetings ahead with Fran from Async and Ben from JSON Schema to get them involved in these projects, because the service providers and the tooling are not just open API, and so getting wider spec involvement in those is pretty critical. So we'll be back to that next week, and I won't talk so much about Postman.
Cool.
Cool. Anything else, Frank? You last man surviving?
No, well, I hope to be able to carve out an hour or two a week to actually do some work to help you. So I'll just start with a few small things. So yeah, you can send through any small little things if you are looking for specific help on some simple tasks. I'll get up and running that way.
Well, that's the goal with for the service providers, the tools, the extensions, is and that's part of having a workspace, is doing some work and then breaking it into small chunks and going, okay, here are 5 services that we need to kind of profile and add to this list. Here's a chunk of work. And so I'm going to work on what those tasks look like and how so that and try to make it easy to find, so that when you do have a little bit of time, you can come here and grab a chunk of work and move something forward. And it's easy to do and low friction, and there's not a lot of questions about what you should be doing or concerns. You just kind of add a task, tackle it, and add it back into the mix. So yeah, cool. I'll keep you in tune. I'll point you to them as soon as I got a nice simple list.
No worries. Cool. Thanks again.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and wrap it up, and we'll see y'all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Frank. Thanks. Copy.